they're attacking all three of you guys, saying, "Oh, you guys are anti-Semites and you guys are pushing this whole thing." And I give credit because you three have done an incredible job of, you know, awareing the American public on this topic when it comes to Israel's control of the Middle East, what they're doing over there, how they've been able to get away with this for so long, killing people and no one knowing. And, you know, they've been targeting you guys quite a bit. And I see that, you know, there's been a bunch of drama with Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro and everything else like that. What are your thoughts on the on the situation? Because, like, you know, anytime they mention Tucker, you're right there, right? When it comes to the criticism of Israel.
Yeah, even Bibi Netanyahu name checking us was crazy.
Yeah.
On the TikTok thing and why they needed to buy TikTok. They're letting you know this is a psychological operation. That's what they're telling you. They've gone masked down, and it just they've just come more inward. I have no idea why they kept attaching me to Tucker Carlson. They wanted both of us gone, and
Mark Levin loves you.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and she's not wrong about that. The attacks on her became kind of crazy, especially even on social media. Like, I remember, you know, I was put onto Candace around like 2014, 2015, and I didn't really like her at first. And then it wasn't until after 2016 when I really started to not only listen to her, but look up some of the things she was saying. I'm like, holy shit, hold on, she's onto something. And at that point, she was at the Daily Wire, so it wasn't like she was really talking about the Jewish things. But fast forward to now and kind of how she's left the Daily Wire or got fired, depending on how you want to categorize that. Between that and the story of Nick Fuentes and how Nick Fuentes was attacked at 18 by Ben Shapiro and essentially the Jewish apparatus, that makes me think. I wouldn't say I'm on the level of the conspiracy theory of saying that Jews are controlling everything and that they have all these other things that are behind the scenes and blah, 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 all the crazy shit you can imagine. I wouldn't go that far, but I'm definitely willing to say that there's something that is funny about all of this situation, especially when it comes to AIPAC and the amount of control that AIPAC has in our government. There's just something's off. It might not be as bad as they say. It might not even be the things that they say, but it is just something that I don't know. I question myself, and I think we should be able to question. I think the moment you can't question something, that's when you really should become suspicious of it.
They force fired Tucker, they force fired me, and then they realized, oh, we can't control them, and we started having to build our own power centers, and they didn't like that.
And they made you guys bigger.
Exactly. So, and then with the Nick Fuentes thing, I promise you, I had never heard the Nick Fuentes backstory until after I was fired from Daily Wire.
Yeah, me either. I just thought Nick Fuentes was racist. I seen some of the clips. I was like, yeah, this dude is crazy. And don't get me wrong, he says some wild shit. I still, like, listen, when someone says things that are extreme, I'm going to call them out. I'm going to be like, bro, I don't know about that. But when they say things that make sense, even if I don't like what side they're on, I'm going to also be like, hey, that kind of makes sense. I've seen the Tucker Carlson episode. I saw Nick Fuentes on Candace Owens, and I've just seen Nick talk about it, and his backstory is crazy.
There was this Twitter audio or X audio space that he did with Jeremy Boring, who at that time was the CEO of Daily Wire. And I heard the backstory and I was like, this is insane, like what happened to him. Nobody can look at that backstory of what happened to him and not realize that it was just evil.
They did everything they can to contain him. It's ridiculous.
This is like he had his life ahead of him. And so you kind of root for that. You're like, no matter how I feel about him, I root for him against the Zionist lobby. And this rule that you can't speak to Nick, why can't I speak to Nick? Can't my audience decide whether or not they want to listen to him? There's this false idea of platforming him, that somehow that's going to be harmful and you can't platform him. If I platform him and Nick seems likable, right? And then he goes on his show and he says horrific things, and my listeners then go over to his show, they're not going to keep listening to Nick.
Yeah.
They're actually then going to have questions about me.
Yeah. Let the people decide.
Let the people decide.
Yeah.
You don't get to think for people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's no such thing as platforming ideas. If people are following that idea, that is on the people.
Yeah.
And they are smart enough to make their own decisions. I don't need to tell people to listen to Nick, to not listen to Nick, to platform Nick, to not platform Nick. If I want to talk to Nick, I'll talk to Nick. If I don't want to talk to Nick, I don't talk to Nick. And there's something about the true free markets that Zionists can't stand. They're constantly manipulating the markets so that people think that they are number one, and they're not. They actually require censorship in order for them to be number one.
Yeah, yeah, and that's their game. And you know, I seeing Ben Shapiro have a meltdown. You know, they had the Republican Jewish Coalition a couple weeks ago, and just saying like, oh, these people are platforming whatever. I find it interesting how like they never like. Because when you guys, if you actually listen to the interviews that you guys do a lot of the times, it's like, oh, this makes perfect sense. I understand like why you have this worldview. they never criticize what you guys talk about, right? They always criticize you guys directly, saying they're pushing anti-Semitism. Well, what are they saying that's anti-Semitic? Oh, well, it's just anti-Semitic. And they don't even want to have the discussion, the debate,
usually the truth
or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you hear Nick Fuentes' backstory, it's compelling. It just is. I was compelled when I heard it. I actually haven't gotten around to watching his interview with Tucker. It's on my to-do list this weekend, but I'm assuming he told his backstory.
Yep.
And then people look at it and go, what is up with this Zionist lobby that they're going after 18-year-old kids for questioning Israel? That's actually what they're fearful of, is people understanding just how long this has been going on, how vicious it is that it will even go after an 18-year-old who's just asking questions literally. And yeah, I think that's what it is. It's the mass awakening that's happening.
Yeah, no. And you know, I credit you, Tucker, Nick, some of the biggest voices in it, like waking people up to this problem that we've had for so long, right? I mean, it got us into wars. And I do think that we're making an impact on it, because I remember when Trump bombed Iran, he had a lot of pressure on him not to do it, right? And he was like kind of going back and forth. I know Steve Bannon had like went to the White House and told him don't do it, or at least push it off a little bit. And he bombed him, and then he ended it there, right? Who knows if, you know, if he didn't have that pressure from his base to not go to war, if he had would have expanded the conflict, because we know Israel wanted to, right? If this was like 2003, who knows if we wouldn't have just gone into like a full-on war. But I think big voices in social media that we didn't have back in 03 were able to kind of pressure, like, hey, we voted for no wars. Like, and then it kind of forced them to be like, I want to keep the base. All right, just bomb him and get out of here. Because that was even very unpopular.
Yeah. And even like, as you see in this conversation, they were pretty much controlled and concise in their opinions and their thought processes. And, you know, I respect them. I don't agree with everything they say, but that's what we need. We need more people like this.
Given the problems that we have, you know, obviously, whether it's me or Tate or other people, will kind of come in and say, hey, this is what you need to do as a guy. You know, this is how the modern day marketplace is now when it comes to dating. What's your approach to kind of combating this problem from a female perspective?
First, you have to understand the origin of feminism, right? You have to understand that this was not a culture and an ideology that came because they wanted women to have equal rights with men, okay? This was a CIA-sponsored PSYOP. Gloria Steinem was sponsored by the CIA, okay? These protests were sponsored by men in government. A lot of them homosexual, actually. And the reason for that was simply because they wanted to tax, it was actually twofold, I would say. They wanted to tax household income both ways. And also they wanted women to, instead of focusing on their kids, which comes natural to women, right, to be the quote unquote, like I say, CEO of the household, they wanted to remove that and to have the children given to the government for 6 hours a day. Beyond 6 hours a day, 6 hours a day, plus whatever sports activities, which gives the government full control over the minds of the children. This came straight from the Pale of Settlement. After they assassinated the Tsar, you had these Jewish women like Emma Goldman, who came over to America. Emma Goldman was the mentor to what's her face from Planned Parenthood. I'm blanking on her name for a moment. I'm going to say Margaret Sanger. That was her mentor. Mm-hmm. And so this was, in fact, a very radical communist movement that came to America and sought to overthrow families.
When I first heard this a while back, I've actually done research on both Margaret Sanger and Gloria Steinem. But here's the proof that what she's saying is true. I actually have it up, which for some reason it just disappeared. 1 second. I know it's here. Here we go. So, and I just did a quick Google search. Was Gloria Steinem sponsored by the CIA? And it says, yes, Gloria Steinem was sponsored by the CIA because she worked for International Research Service, IRS, a foundation that was largely financed by the CIA. She worked there from 1958 to 1962 and was tasked with recruiting American students to attend and disrupt international student events sponsored by the Soviet Union. Role: Skyscraper reports that Steinem's job was to counter Soviet propaganda at student festivals such as the one in Vietnam in 1959. CIA financing. It says the organization she worked for, the International Research Service, was a CIA-backed foundation. Steinem's perspective. Steinem had stated that she saw nothing wrong with her job at the time, saying she found the agency to be liberal, nonviolent, and honorable, and would do it again if given the choice. Her connection to the CIA later became a source of controversy, with some feminists accusing her of being part of the CIA plot to undermine the women's movement. You know, that's, to me, that's wild. Like, you wouldn't think the feminist movement was sponsored by the CIA. What? that probably makes me misogynistic for saying that, but you know, it is what it is. It's you can easily go, you could look at her, you could read her book, you could look into her, and
Family institutions, strong men, feminine women, stands in the way of government and absolute control.
In your book, Make 'Em a Sandwich, what are some of the things that you tell the women? Because I'm assuming it's a book that's going to be centered around how women can kind of get in a marketplace, find a long-term partner, get married. What are some of the strategies that you tell women to implement to find a partner? You don't have to give it all away.
Yeah,
Maybe
no,
one
it's
or two.
fine. I don't even try in my book to sell them a strategy or a technique. I just tell the truth. So here's the history of feminism. Here's what we were told in school. Here's actually how it went down, right? Knowledge is power. I give them the actual statistics of the fact that what was sold to you was you were going to be just like a man and you were going to be happier. Women are actually more miserable than they've ever been. If you go back and you ask most women about their grandmothers, they remember grandma being happy, right? So what they actually sold to you, now you've achieved this equality, quote unquote equality, and women have never been more miserable, and women are popping more pills than they were popping and finding it harder to find a partner and wondering why. Well, it's because you attacked
all true.
natural masculinity. You told men that they shouldn't be allowed to lead, women have to lead, and actually you didn't want that, right? You were convinced psychologically in a classroom, as I was back when I wanted to be a feminist, or I thought feminism was cool. And you should know that.
And not only that, but then that convincing led to people like Myron, Tate, you know, and the whole red pill, you know, the Tomasi or whatever his name is, and Donovan Sharp, and all these dudes who now exude the most extreme side of what it is to be a man, quote unquote. You know, you hear how they talk and the things that they say, and it's like, I can agree with some of the thoughts that they have, but I just feel the way that they go about is what makes so many people upset, right? It makes it's so abrasive because of the feminist movement and the way that it downed men. It got to the point where the only people who would talk about positivity when it came to men and how men should do things were the most extreme. And a lot of the things that they talk about, whether you like it or not, are grounded in facts. Now, they might go above and beyond and to the extreme when it comes to some of those facts, but they're grounded in facts. And they've become as popular as they have because there's some truth to it. Because if there was no truth to it, it wouldn't have gained popularism. And it's not because, you know, men were brainwashed, but just like Candace said, it's like some of the things that we like to do were immediately deemed toxic. It's just like, we're not the same. We don't think the same. We don't move the same. We don't live the same. We're different. And as a matter of fact, I actually had this conversation with a young lady most recently. She didn't like my train of thought, but her example of why things weren't as good as they were better now versus worse before was because now women have choice. And yeah, they might be taking more antidepressants, but that's because antidepressants are looked at with less stigma, which is like, that's not the only thing. Like, antidepressants are not the kind of thing that you want to be on to make you feel better. Like, there's something inherently wrong for you to be on that, whether you're a man or a woman. It's just like, that's not the cure. That doesn't make things better. As a matter of fact, that causes other imbalances in your body, and it amplifies the already imbalance that you have, which I think, you know, like I always say to you guys, this is a multi-level situation. I don't blame not one side of it, because I don't think it's all women's fault, and I don't think it's all men's fault. I think that as a collective group, we've allowed that both sides become an extreme where women think, oh no, the women of the 50s were oppressed, and true liberation is being able to be like a man, when true liberation should be being the most feminine you can be, that then allows your man to want to be that masculine protective guy that would essentially lead both of you guys to thriving, because you are in what you're supposed to be. We were created for each other. We weren't created despite each other. Like, and that's one of the things, that's the conversation I had. She didn't really like my train of thought. She thought I was just alpha and red pill, which I'm far from red pill. I might be alpha and I might sit on the line of some of these things, but for the most part, I just think that we need each other. And I think that's what Candace is pushing. I think that's what Myron is pushing. Even though Candace, I think, is a little bit more understandable, but Myron is super extreme sometimes, even going as far as saying some wild shit and calling women all kinds of names.
I think that that's how you change things without trying to say, here's a strategy and here's how we're going to move forward. Let people know true knowledge, let people know true history. And I think the rest of the stuff happens naturally, or I hope.
For you on your journey, when did you like figure out that feminism was a lie? Like, was there a certain event that triggered it that you were like, holy crap, this is BS?
I actually tell the story in this book. I think I do, actually. I think it's in this book, or it's in my last book, actually. It's in Blackout, of this teacher that I had. And I was required to take a Feminism 101. It was called Women's Studies. Maybe it was Women's Studies 201 at the University of Rhode Island. And at that time, I was like, yeah, I'm feminist, of course. Who doesn't
Shout
want
out,
equality as they sold it?
Yeah.
Again, to his classroom. And this teacher, I realized very quickly, was not actually motivated by wanting equality. I was in a classroom where she was trying to convince me that every problem that we had in society was due to men. This was a literal class that was designed to basically teach women to hate men.
Yeah.
Like, no matter, all you had to do to get an A was she would introduce any problem. She could have lost her keys that morning and been like.
And I think that's another good point right there, because anytime I've ever had the conversation with anyone who sits on that side of the fence, usually women, they usually have this disdain for men, and it comes from past experiences or their thought process of what their mom went through and watching their mom, and how their mom served their father, and they're like, I don't want to I don't want to have to serve my husband like that, when that's actually a great honor. Obviously, there are bad men out there. There are men who ain't shit. So I understand that there are some bad situations, but you can't equate every situation to one bad experience. And I think that's she positioned it perfectly. You have a class in college that you have to that you take that's about feminism, and they blame everything on men. Like, what do you expect is gonna happen if that's the kind of learning that we're getting in a college like URI, which URI is a very nice college. The University of Rhode Island is not a cheap college to go to.
Why did this happen?
Patriarchy.
Well, you know what? Who designed cars? You know who designed cars? Do you know who designed the whole concept of a car key, and who designed the couch that you lost it in this morning? It was men. It became to a point where, for me, it was like laughable.
Yeah.
But there was this one particular class where it clicked for me, because when I was in college, I had an eating disorder. So I was sitting in her class, and I was anorexic, and she gets into this topic of anorexia, eating disorders, and she gave us some statistic about the percentage of women that have eating disorders. And I'm making this up now, but it was something like 80% of people who have eating disorders are women. And she asked the class, why is that? And we were supposed to say, and she did say, that it was because men control the advertising agency and men want women to be skinny. And it had literally, I'm sitting here having this experience, nothing to do with a man. Like, nothing, no man said you're fat, you have to be skinny. That is completely made up. And I'm listening to her try to psychologically convince me that my eating disorder came from a man, when it just factually didn't. Most people who suffer with anorexia know it's a control mechanism. It actually has nothing even to do with weight. It just is.
If she wouldn't have been willing to be like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense to me, or just believes the teacher, she would have been on the same path that you see nowadays, where it's like, oh, it's men's fault. Men are misogynistic, and everything that men has created is to oppress women. When in all true reality, if you really look at the invention of things, a lot of things that men invent were to make the world dominated a bit easier, and to make the world safer, and to appease women, right? I had my grandpa tell me this one time. uh he always said, like, you pay for women, and I always found that weird, because it's like, I would never pay for a woman. And then I grow up and I realize, like, yeah, you do. I do. The car that I bought, I bought the kind of car because I wanted to impress a woman, even if I'm doing this subconsciously, right? I'm not saying like outwardly doing this, but the reason that I make sure, like, my fingernails are trimmed nice, the reason I smell good, the reason I try to look good, the reason I go get a haircut, the reason I go, I built a business and sold it, and I want to build another business and have more money. The reason we all do this is to attract the female gaze. There's no other reason to do all of this. I could easily live in a very small place, no problem, and not worry about the outside world thinks. But we all do that, and we do that because we are trying to impress women inherently. And I don't mean impress them in the sense of like, oh, because I need her validation. No, because we're wired to be together. We're wired for that appreciation of a woman when you make her smile, when you make her happy, when she's, you know, crying of joy because you did something for her, whether that's your mom, whether that's your sister, whether that's, you know, your spouse. And it's like, to not see that to me is wild. And it's just like, I get, and again, I don't want to discredit the fact that there are men out there who ain't shit, but that's not the majority of men. Those men who ain't shit are not the majority. I refuse to believe that.
Like, this is the one thing you can control. And I just kind of called her out on that, and I raised my hand. I was like, whoa, wait a second. Okay, well, let's look at another statistic. What percentage of people are juicing up with steroids, right? That's not a super healthy thing to do. If we said that 90% of it was men, would you have presented to the class that it was because of women, right? Because women are telling them they have to look like this. And she was, I mean, when I say she went white, and she said to me, and I always tell the story on stage, she said to me, I feel like you were sent to me from the men's department.
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I told her that
damn.
I told her back that I was sent to her from the common sense department.
Yeah.
Right.
And that everything couldn't be because of men.
Right, which we don't have a lot of common sense in the world nowadays. Mostly in the United States, there's not very much common sense left. Or if there is a lot of common sense, it's being hidden very well.
So I think that was kind of the first time that it clicked for me that this was some sort of a psychological program. In many ways, I was actually saved
And how
by.
old were you at that point?
I was in college,
20s?
so I was 19.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it was the first year of college.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a prerequisite. So it was interesting for me, I think.
Did that make you shift your priorities? Like,
I was never a gun-ho feminist. I just was like in the back of my mind, same way that I was liberal. Like, I was never voting Democrat, but if you had asked me, what do you think about this? I would have very quickly been like, of course we need feminism.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of thinking, man, these women are really annoying in this classroom. Because then there were the majors that were there, you know, the people, these women that were tatted up and like growing their armpit hair out. You know, we had those people in class, and I was like, I don't like any of these people.
Yeah,
So
the
it
extreme.
made me think that there was something more to the feminist movement, I think, which was indoctrination.
Interesting. Okay. So I think you've been able to do what every woman dreams of: have a family, have children, have your dream man, but simultaneously being able to also, you know, run a business and do what you want to do. And I noticed when you were debating on Jubilee, some of them tried to say, oh, well, you're a hypocrite. You're over here talking about feminism being bad, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, you obviously have a lot of things set up where you maximize your ability to be with your family, right? You do your show, get out of there, spend time with your family. What would you say to the people that sit there and try to call you a hypocrite because, you know, you're successful in your own right, but you've been able to also balance a family, which many women can't do. They want to do it, but they can't do it. What would your response be to those critics?
First and foremost, do not allow people to rule you by exceptions. What I mean by that is, it is such a mistake to look at my life and to say, Candace did this, and so therefore I can do this. My life is actually exceptional, right? We are sitting in my house. I do things on my own terms. I wake up in the morning. I get to homeschool my kids, right? I'm homeschooling my children for hours. That's now very important to me. I get to do a podcast from home, and I am actually doing something that I enjoy, right? What is the number one thing? If you find any woman that makes it and she's successful, what is she doing? She's tapping into her femininity, communication. Women communicate more than men. I have a whole chapter on this. If you have a daughter and a son, you know this.
She's making a good point.
Girls start speaking faster, and we will speak more words from men for the rest of our lives. And when you actually look, and I ask people in this chapter, who is the most, if I ask you the question right now, who is the most successful man in the world? Just give me your answer. If you have to name a couple
Musk,
of them.
Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates.
I was going to say, like, from a financial perspective?
Just, yeah, sure. Full stop. If I said who's the most successful man in the world,
Trump.
I mean, you could say, like, the richest guy in the world, who would be Elon, even though
Peter Thiel.
But,
okay, yeah. But that's the right. You would say Elon, or you would say
something based on meritocracy, finances.
Yeah, exactly.
You would say Jeff Bezos.
Precisely.
Everyone would say the same answers, right? If I ask you who is the most successful woman in the world, what would you say?
That's where it gets
right.
That's I see what you're saying.
Like, what is it? Like,
wow,
off the top
that's
of
a
your
good
mind,
point.
like what are the names that come to your mind?
Yeah, it's an ambiguous. Like, you're like, okay, well, are we going to go off career?
Right, are we gonna go off career, family status? Like, what would we go off? Like, what? That's a good point. I'm trying to think. I guess like Oprah maybe. Um, who else? Michelle Obama. I mean, I guess she was the first lady. Um, damn, I can't even. Maybe like a Taylor Swift as well, or put some answers in the chat. Let me know what you guys think. I don't know. Let's see. Let's see what they
You
say.
know,
Yeah,
where
but
versus a
most
man,
people
it's
would
like,
say like Taylor Swift
Oh shit.
or Oprah.
mm-hmm.
Oh
These
shit.
women are
Beyonce.
nowhere near the
Beyonce. That's a
richest
good
women in
one.
the world. Nobody knows the name of the richest woman in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go about through
Mm.
this in my chapter. Yeah, you'd say Beyonce. I'm like, these are the names that you would say off the top of your head if I asked you who's the most successful. Nobody knows, everybody knows the names of the most, the richest men in the world. And yet nobody knows the names of the richest women in the world, right?
Mm.
Nobody knows the names of them. And the
That's a
answer
good
is a
point.
Russian woman. I talk
True.
about this in my book. I'm like, nobody knows her name. And the women that you do name actually all tapped into their femininity. Taylor Swift was writing songs about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
She was writing songs about looking for love,
Mm-hmm.
and women flocked to this. Oprah was communicating to the housewife, right? She was speaking about issues. They're tapping in actually to the one thing that actually you think they're standing against. Oh, they're the ultimate feminists. No, they tapped into their femininity and found success, actually. And women do not, when we think about success, we don't measure it in terms of finances. That's why these women we think are the most quote unquote successful women in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas men naturally think finances. Oh, it's Jeff Bezos, it's Elon Musk. So I do a chapter and I speak about that in my book about who the richest woman in the world is. And then the next 10 women who are the richest in the world are all rich because of who they divorced.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep. Yeah,
So
Damn.
what is the picture that we're recognizing?
Mackenzie Bezos, Melinda Gates, who else? That's so crazy. She just blew my mind with that thought process. Like that's low key true. You know, success in men and women is measured differently, and I think that's part of the problem we're at, where success for women is now being measured in men's metrics, which is like that's how us men look at things. Like, how successful am I is judged by how much money I make, what kind of car I could buy, what kind of woman I have, and how she looks, how smart she is, what she can do in order to make my life easier. That would be how a man would look at another man and be like, okay, he's successful. Even if you don't have a lot of money, but if you have a woman who believes in you and is willing to look out for you and look after you as well, right? And I don't mean look after you like a child. I'm talking about like look after you from the perspective of a partner who wants you to do better. Yeah, you would be considered by other men as rich. And then when we look at women, what would you consider a woman who's rich? I would consider a woman, and this is from my perspective, a man's perspective, but I think a lot of men would agree with this. Is like, I would consider a woman who's rich, who has children and has a home, a family that is dependent on her and how she is, as far as like the kind of home she constructed for them, right? Whether it's taking care of the kids, whether it's making sure the husband's on time with not only his health, but making sure that, he's not missing things for work. And, a lot, I know I'm probably going to catch some heat for saying things like that, because like, oh, you just think she's a helpmate and da. It's like, no, I think there is value in a woman who takes care of her man, takes care of her children, and turns a home into a house. Or excuse me, turns a house into a home. I think there's value in that. There's more value in that than being a woman who is a CEO who was able to get to the top of a corporation and make a lot of money. If I had to pick between a woman who I know could raise my children and could be a better person and just overall looking after me the way that I've seen a woman look after her man, I'd probably choose that woman who's a homemaker versus the super rich woman, because I could get money, Now I don't know, I've never really dated a woman who has a lot of money. It's never been something I've been, I guess, lucky enough to find. But if I was to meet a woman who had a lot of money and we were dating, I wouldn't have a problem with it either. I don't see it as a one-sided thing. I think things fit different people. But if I was to prescribe the richest woman, I think I would prescribe it in that manner.
Here, we don't measure success in the same terms as men measure success, nor should we.
Yeah.
And
We're
it's
different.
important
We
for
shouldn't.
women not to think that becoming financially rich somehow means that you are successful or that you have triumph something in life.
And since having children, like how has that like shifted your priorities as far as, I mean, and you can go into as much detail or as little as you want, as far as like how you've kind of prioritized child rearing versus like maybe your career and doing social media as much? Because I noticed, you know, before you were super active, you still post obviously every day, but now it's like, you know, you have other priorities. So how has that kind of shifted?
Yeah, my family is my number one priority. I would say having kids made me more secure than ever before. I just don't care about the noise. None of it matters anymore. And also, I have real stake in this fight. Before, these were just ideas. America shouldn't be run like this. This is why, this is what's bad. Once you have kids, you have actually a real stake in the future of America. So when I am podcasting, the subjects that I am covering to me are existential, right? Are we being ruled by pedophiles and criminals? That's now existential for me. What is happening in the school systems? What is happening in these churches? What is going on? This is now existential because my children will inherit the America that I fight for or the America that I remain silent about.
And just to kind of finish
that's a
off
good
with the
point.
feminism real quick. So what do you think are the top 3 things holding women back from fulfillment and happiness right now?
Oh, that's a good
The
question. Let's see what she
number
says.
one thing I would say that's holding women back would be not understanding the history of feminism. I think once you know that,
Okay.
everything, like, knowledge is actually power. I would say the second thing that's holding them back is the psychology of peer pressure. And that is the psychology, and the peer pressure starts when we are in school, with women being told, you have to go to college, you have to have a career. The last thing you should be thinking about, you have plenty of time. You don't actually have plenty of time. Biologically speaking, you literally don't have plenty of time. Men might have plenty of time, biologically speaking, but your body is telling you you don't. And so I think, and then that kind of gets into the education. The education system truly is just Soviet propaganda in the classrooms. So those would be the top 2 things. And so they're ignoring their gut instinct and following the herd.
So understanding what feminism is and how it came into place
Historically.
makes it a lot easier to understand everything else. All right, fair enough.
You see it nowadays, you know, and I'll say this, which might be controversial, but I think, you know, society was better off when we were more of a family unit. You know, you have a mom and a dad in the home. You grow up and see mom and dad work through things, and you see, as a man myself, you would see how a man should treat a woman. Obviously, if your dad is a respectable human being and doesn't, you know, isn't a shitty father, then you would see that dynamic, which is probably the best way to raise children, right? Would be in that kind of dynamic. And, you know, I think society has changed a lot, and we're at a point where the pendulum has swung super far one way, regardless of why, whether it's, you know, because of Gloria Steinem and CIA sponsored propaganda, and, you know, regardless of what it is, we've swung all the way to one direction. I'm curious what the swing back is going to look like, and is it going to happen, or are we still in a point where we're still swinging far out to, or farther out to a point where we get even worse results of what we're already getting. So, you know, it's really interesting times to see that, you know, relationships are almost non-existent, and when you do see relationships, you don't see them as last as long as our parents. And then also just the overall nature of the things that we are consuming and how we're consuming are changing, and, you know, algorithms are changing things, and you know, we'll see how things are. But I think this was a good interview. It was good to see Myron a little bit chilled out. Props out to Candace, and I've said this plenty of times before. Like, I think she's an extremely smart woman. I actually think she's extreme. That makes it, to me, that's like the most attractive thing about her. I mean, she is gorgeous, but just how smart she is, and how well articulated she is, and how well thought out are her ideas. I'm truly astonished and impressed by her. And there are a few other people as well that I can name, black women specifically, like, you know, Amalia Epinobia, I believe is her last name. Man, whew, another smoke show. I think she has a man. So unfortunately, there's just something about a woman who is smart and then understands feminism and what blessing feminism really can be to her life that is extremely attractive. Maybe that's just me. I don't know how you guys feel. Let me know how you guys feel about that in the comments, because I definitely am extremely attracted to smart women.